Ethan Mercer sat in his office at Riverside Community College, grading papers. The clock on his desk indicated a late hour. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he barely noticed the cramped space with overflowing books. The sound of his phone buzzing interrupted his concentration. A short message from Elena, working late. Read, "Don't wait up." Ethan's jaw tightened as he typed, "Everything okay?" 3 dots appeared and reappeared. Elena was busy with the Harris account. Ethan set his phone down deliberately. This marked the 4th time that week Elena had stayed late at her real estate office. The excuses were wearing thin, like a favorite shirt washed too many times. A student's voice called, "Hey, Professor Mercer." A janitor announced they were locking up soon as Ethan gathered his papers. "Thanks, Clara. Have a good evening," he replied. Outside, the summer heat lingered despite the late hour. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time it was Damien, his best friend since youth. "Hey, brother. Got extra work at the site tomorrow. Could use another pair of hands." Ethan smiled. "Count me in. Same time. You know it. Bring your work boots and that powerful right hook of yours." Construction work had become his refuge, where problems had simple solutions. Driving home, he passed Elena's office. Her car remained in the lot, and only one window was lit. His grip tightened on the wheel, but he drove past without stopping. At home, 16-year-old Leela sat at the kitchen counter surrounded by textbooks. "Dad, I was hoping you'd be home for dinner," she exclaimed. "Wouldn't miss it, kiddo." Ethan dropped his briefcase and joined her. "What's giving you trouble tonight?" Leela asked. "AP History, covering the French Revolution and all these political factions." Ethan pulled up a chair and said, "Let's break it down. Start with the main players." They spent the next hour discussing historical alliances and betrayals while sharing leftover lasagna. Ethan watched Leela's quick mind at work, pride momentarily replacing his unease. Leela had inherited his love of history and her mother's keen intelligence. Yet lately, he hoped she'd take after him more. "Mom's working late again?" Leela asked casually. "Big account," Ethan replied in a neutral tone. "How about we watch that documentary you mentioned?" Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his study with a glass of bourbon untouched. He opened his laptop and checked his banking app. The numbers looked ordinary, yet something felt wrong. He had been tracking their accounts closely. Before long, the front door opened. Ethan remained in his study, listening to Elena's movements, heels clicking on tile, keys dropping into a ceramic bowl, and the soft whoosh of the refrigerator. Her footsteps approached. Ethan didn't look up when Elena appeared in the doorway. "You're still up," she said, her voice carrying surprise tinged with irritation. "Grading papers," Ethan replied, his screen showing bank statements instead of essays. Elena lingered in the doorway, her silhouette uncertain. "The Harris account is proving complicated, but the commission will be worth it," she said. Ethan finally looked at her. Her makeup was perfect, and her blouse was crisp. She looked as if she had just begun her day. "Complicated how?" he asked evenly. Elena touched her neck, a tell from high school days. "Just some paperwork issues. Nothing exciting," she said with a forced smile. "I'm exhausted." "Coming to bed?" she asked. "In a bit," she replied, then turned away. Ethan waited until her footsteps faded before returning to his banking app, clicking through joint accounts and mortgage payments. Everything looked normal on the surface, yet Ethan, after 20 years teaching history, knew to spot small inconsistencies that revealed larger truths. His phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "Early tomorrow, brother. Bring your A game." Ethan sent a thumbs-up emoji and closed his laptop. Tomorrow he would visit the bank during lunch. Something wasn't adding up, and Ethan Mercer had never ignored his instincts. The next morning, Ethan was up before sunrise. His routine remained unchanged despite the tension at home. Coffee brewed at its usual time, and he packed his lunch, leaving a note for Leela about dinner. He then headed out to meet Damien at the construction site. The physical labor cleared his mind. Damien had him hauling lumber and checking measurements, tasks that required focus yet allowed conversation. "How's Alina?" Damien asked during their break, not meeting Ethan's eyes. "Busy with work," Ethan replied. "You've seen her around town?" Damien asked, shrugging as he munched his sandwich. "Here and there. You know how it is in a small town." Ethan knew when his oldest friend was holding something back. The day passed in a blur of concrete dust and sweat. Just as he finished up, his phone rang from an unknown number. "Is this Ethan Mercer?" the caller asked. "Speaking," Ethan answered. "Mr. Mercer, my name is Victor Alvarez. We need to discuss a rather urgent financial matter. Would you meet tomorrow morning?" Ethan's instincts screamed. "What's this regarding?" he asked. "A loan agreement bearing your signature. It is best we discuss this in person. Tomorrow morning at your office," Victor said. Ethan agreed, mind racing with possibilities. That night, when Alina announced another late meeting, Ethan did not argue. Instead, he spent the evening reviewing old bank statements and credit reports, preparing for whatever tomorrow might bring. The next morning, Victor Alvarez entered Ethan's office wearing success like a second skin. A tailored suit, manicured nails, and shoes costing more than Ethan's monthly salary. Yet his predatory smile set Ethan's teeth on edge. "Mr. Mercer," Victor began, placing a folder on Ethan's desk. "I had a loan agreement for $500,000, co-signed by you 3 months ago. Payment is due in 30 days. Ethan did not reach for the folder. "I haven't signed any loan agreements," Ethan stated. Victor's smile did not waver. "Your signature suggests otherwise," he said as he slid a document across the desk. Ethan examined it carefully. The signature looked like his, close enough to fool a casual observer, but Ethan knew his handwriting. The slight leftward slant, and the way he crossed his T's. "This is a forgery," Ethan declared flatly. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Mercer, one that could have unpleasant consequences," Victor replied, his tone pleasant but his eyes cold. 30 days, Mr. Mercer. I trust you appreciate meeting deadlines." After Victor left, Ethan sat at his desk, rage building in his chest. Someone had forged his signature and set him up for a fall, and he had a sickening feeling that he knew who was behind it. That evening, Ethan drove to Alina's office again. He parked and waited. Later, she emerged with a stack of files, foam pressed to her ear. Ethan watched as she loaded them into her car and drove away, not toward home but away. Ethan followed at a discreet distance. 15 minutes later, Alina pulled into the parking lot of a riverside mid-range hotel on the outskirts of town. He parked across the street and watched her grab her briefcase and disappear inside. "Is phone buzzed?" Damien again. "Still on for tomorrow morning." Ethan read the message and then looked at the hotel entrance where his wife had vanished. 20 years of friendship and trust suddenly felt very fragile. He typed back. Something came up. Rain check. The next few days blurred into an investigation filled with mounting evidence. Ethan contacted banks and pulled records until a chilling picture emerged. Large sums were moving between accounts, and forged documents revealed a web of deception that had been in the making for months, possibly years. He hired Sophie Chung, a lawyer recommended by a colleague. Sophie took one look at the loan agreement and frowned. "This is sophisticated work," she said, examining the signature. Before they could finish their meeting, the police arrived. 2 officers, grim-faced and professional, approached with hands on their belts. "Ethan Mercer, you're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement," they declared. Ethan stood slowly, his mind racing. Through the office window, he glimpsed Alina in the parking lot talking to Victor Alvarez. Their heads were close, and for a moment, Alvarez's hand rested on her arm in a familiar gesture. As the officers escorted him out, Ethan's thoughts were not on the charges or the handcuffs biting his wrists. He was thinking about patterns, betrayal, and how his wife had not seemed surprised as she watched him being led away. Most of all, He was thinking about revenge. The interrogation room at the police station smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Detective Helena Santos sat across from Ethan Mercer, her dark eyes studying him with professional detachment as she laid out photographs and documents on the metal table. "Let's go through this again, Mr. Mercer," she said, tapping a finger on a bank statement. $500,000 was transferred from your wife's real estate company account to Mr. Alvarez's private account. Your signature authorized the transfer. Want to explain that? Ethan met her gaze steadily. "That's not my signature. Our forensics team disagrees," he replied. Detective Santos slid another document forward. A detailed analysis of the signature comparison. "They say it's a 98% match." "Then your forensics team needs better equipment," Ethan replied, his voice hard. "I didn't sign anything." Detective Santos leaned back, crossing her arms. "You teach history at Riverside Community College, correct? Your salary is about $65,000 a year. Yet we found evidence of recent large purchases, a vacation home in the Cayman Islands, a boat, and several high-end vehicles, all under your name." Ethan's jaw tightened. Someone had been busy creating a paper trail, and he had a good idea who. "I don't own any of those things," he insisted. "The documentation suggests otherwise." Detective Santos paused, studying his face. "Your wife, Alina, seems to think you've been under a lot of pressure lately, talking about early retirement and making big plans." Ethan asked quietly, "Did Alina mention where she was 2 nights ago?" "The Riverside Inn, perhaps," Detective Santos replied, her expression unchanged, though something flickered in her eyes. "Mr. Mercer, you're facing serious charges. This is not the time for unfounded accusations," she warned. "Nothing I've said is unfounded, Detective. But you're right about one thing. Someone has been under pressure. Someone has been planning something. Just not who you think," Ethan retorted. The door opened, and Sophie Chang strode in, briefcase in hand. "This interview is over. My client will not answer any more questions without me present," she declared. After Detective Santos left, Sophie turned to Ethan. "They've got a strong circumstantial case. The signature analysis, the financial records, the purchases. Someone did their homework." Ethan stated flatly, "Alina is behind this." Sophie replied, "That's a serious accusation to make about your wife. Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I will." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "What are my options?" Sophie spread her hands. "Right now, not great. The evidence against you is circumstantial but convincing. We need something concrete to prove your innocence." "And in the meantime?" Ethan asked. "You'll be held until your arraignment. I'll try to get bail set, but with the amount involved." She left the sentence hanging. "Well, not exactly," Ethan murmured, his mind already working through scenarios. "I need you to do something for me, Sophie. Check into Victor Alvarez's background. Something about him isn't right." Sophie hesitated. "Be careful, Ethan. These people, whoever they are organized, connected, and have clearly been planning this for a while." Ethan smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "So have I, Sophie. They just don't know it yet." The next few days in county jail gave Ethan plenty of time to think. He observed everything: the guards' routines, the dynamics between inmates, and the subtle power structures that govern life behind bars. He made no friends and started no conversations. He watched and planned. Alina visited him on the 3rd day. She wore a conservative black dress and looked both concerned and slightly afraid as she sat across from him in the visitor's room. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I don't understand what's happening. The police say you've been stealing money and making illegal deals." Ethan studied her face, her careful makeup and practiced expression of distress. How many times had she rehearsed this performance in front of a mirror? "Interesting choice of hotel," he said quietly. "The Riverside Inn, room 412, wasn't it?" Elena's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. What are you talking about? You tell me, Elena. Tell me about Victor Alvarez. Tell me about the loan agreement. Tell me about all of it. You're not making sense. Elena reached across the table, trying to take his hand. Ethan pulled back before she could touch him. Elena pleaded, Ethan, please, let me help you. Like you helped set me up. Ethan's voice was soft and dangerous as he replied, I trusted you, Elena. Remember that. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. Perfect timing, Ethan noted clinically. I don't know what's happened to you, she whispered. You're not the woman I married. No, Ethan agreed. I'm not. And you're not the woman I married. The difference is, I know exactly what I am. The tears spilled over. Leela needs you home. She's devastated. Ethan's voice cut like a blade. Don't you dare use our daughter against me. A guard approached. Time's up. Elena stood, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll figure this out, Ethan. I promise. As she left, her shoulders straightened as if she had regained composure. The performance was over, but the play was just beginning. The preliminary hearing was set for the following week. Ethan sat in the courtroom, listening as the prosecution laid out their case. The evidence was damning. Bank transfers, property purchases, and suspicious meetings with known criminals, all carefully documented and all pointing to him. Then Damien took the stand. Ethan's oldest friend wouldn't meet his eyes as he was sworn in. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, tugging at his collar as he answered questions about their friendship, their work together, and their conversations. Mr. Braun, the prosecutor began, did the defendant ever discuss his financial situation with you? Damien shifted in his seat. Yeah, sometimes, he said. He mentioned that things were tight, that he was tired of living paycheck to paycheck. Did he ever mention specific plans to acquire money quickly? The prosecutor continued. Damien's hands twisted in his lap. He mentioned wanting to make some big changes and said he had plans to get ahead. Could you be more specific about these plans? Asked the prosecutor. Objection. Leading the witness. Sophie called out. Overruled. The witness may answer, the judge said. Damien swallowed hard. He talked about knowing people who could help him make money quickly, saying he was tired of playing by the rules while everyone else got rich. Ethan sat perfectly still, his face a mask of stone. Each word from Damien felt like a betrayal, a carefully constructed lie that fit perfectly into the prosecution's narrative. And did Mr. Mercer discuss any specific amounts? The prosecutor asked. He mentioned needing at least $500,000 to start, Damien replied. He said he had a contact who could help him move the money around and make it look clean. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. No further questions. During cross-examination, Sophie did her best to discredit Damien's testimony, pointing out inconsistencies and highlighting the lack of concrete evidence. But the damage was done. Ethan watched the jury's faces. They believed Damien. They believed the story of a desperate man driven to crime by greed. That evening in his cell, Ethan received a visit from his daughter, Leela. Her eyes were red from crying, but her chin was set in determination. Dad, Leela said, pressing her hand against the glass partition, I know you didn't do this. Ethan placed his hand on the opposite side. I didn't, sweetheart. Someone set me up. Elena has been acting strangely. Leela whispered. She's always on the phone, speaking quietly. And Damien. She hesitated. He comes by the house a lot now. When he thinks I'm not around, he and Mom talk differently than before. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. What do you mean by differently? Like they're sharing a secret. Dad, something's very wrong. Really wrong, Leela said. I know, sweetheart, but I need you to do something for me. Pretend everything's normal, Ethan replied. Leela nodded, her eyes showing a maturity beyond her years. What are they going to do to you? Don't worry about that. I'll handle it. Just remember, whatever happens or you hear, I love you. That will never change, Ethan assured her. After Leela left, Ethan lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The pieces were coming together. Elena, Damien, Victor Alvarez. A conspiracy designed to destroy him and take everything he had. But they made one crucial mistake. They left Leela out of their calculations. The courtroom was packed on the day of sentencing. Ethan Mercer stood before the judge, his back straight and his face impassive. Behind him, he could feel Elena's presence and sense the false concern she projected for the court's benefit. Judge Marcus Holloway peered down from his bench and read from the sentencing document. "Mr. Mercer, you have been found guilty of serious crimes." He continued, "The evidence shows a calculated attempt to defraud and embezzle substantial sums of money, while your previous clean record was considered." Ethan tuned out the judge's voice, focusing on the subtle movements behind him. He did not need to turn to know that Damien was sitting next to Elena, offering silent support. His best friend and his wife, united in betrayal. The judge declared, "It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 3 years in a medium-security correctional facility." The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom. Ethan heard Elena's perfectly timed gasp of distress and the murmurs of the spectators. His attention was fixed on Sophie Chang, who was already preparing their appeal. "I will fight this," she whispered as he was led away. "The evidence was circumstantial. We can't." "No, we cannot appeal," someone said. "Save your energy, Ethan. There are other battles coming." The processing into prison was a blur of paperwork, fingerprints, and institutional clothing. Ethan maintained his composure, speaking only when necessary and observing everything. He was assigned to Cell Block D, a section for nonviolent offenders. That first night, he received an urgent message through the prison computer system. It was from Leela. His hands were steady as he opened it, but what he read made his blood run cold. The message read, "Hey, Dad. Remember your best friend, Noah, who testified against you? He and Mom just announced they've been secretly married for 6 months." It continued, "While you were in prison awaiting trial, they planned this long ago, before she hired that hitman to kill you. The one who confessed and cleared your name." Ethan read the message 3 times, each word burning into his brain. Not Noah, Damien. The name was wrong, but the truth was clear. His wife and best friend had conspired deeper than he had imagined, and a failed attempt was made on his life. He sat on his bunk, letting rage wash over him in waves. Each breath brought new clarity and purpose. They hadn't just tried to destroy his life. They tried to end it, and now they thought they had won. They believed he was safely contained while they enjoyed their victory. Ethan smiled in the darkness of his cell. That smile was not of a beaten man, nor of an angry man. It was the smile of a man who had just found his true purpose. The next morning, Ethan began his new routine. Exercise in the yard, meals in the cafeteria, and hours in the prison library. To the guards and other inmates, he appeared to be adapting well and accepting his fate. They couldn't see him studying legal texts late into the night, making careful notes about prison routines and personnel. He watched, learned, and planned. Every detail was filed away, and every weakness noted. When Elena sent a letter expressing regret at how things had turned out, Ethan read it carefully, noting her careful choice of words and subtle implications. She was covering her tracks, creating a paper trail of concern and support. He folded the letter precisely and added it to his growing collection of evidence. Damien never wrote or visited. Ethan had not expected him to, but the trail was complete. The man who had been his best friend since childhood had moved on to claim his prize, his wife, his life. They had forgotten something essential about Ethan Mercer. They had forgotten that beneath his quiet exterior, beneath the professor's demeanor and the father's gentle smile, there was steel. They had forgotten that a man who studied history understood the architecture of revenge and the patience required for true retribution. Most of all, they had forgotten that they had not killed him. The metal bars of Cell Block D slammed shut behind Ethan Mercer. His new home measured 8 by 10 feet and contained a narrow bunk and a stainless steel toilet sink combination. The previous occupant had left faded pinups and religious pamphlets, which Ethan immediately tore down. A guard called, "Yard time." Ethan nodded, his face expressionless. The prison routine was simple: wake up, eat, exercise, work detail, sleep, and repeat. This simplicity gave him time to think, plan, and observe. In the yard, Ethan leaned against the fence, watching the inmates. Groups had formed by unspoken rules. Drug dealers near the basketball court, white-collar criminals by the weight bench, and violent offenders dominating the center. He belonged to none of them. A voice called, "Hey, Professor, need some protection." Ethan turned to face a muscular man with prison tattoos on his arms. "No," he replied calmly. The man stepped closer, flanked by 2 others. "Smart guy like you should understand how things work in here." Ethan's muscles tensed, but his voice remained calm. "Walk away." The man laughed and reached for Ethan's shoulder. What happened next was quick, efficient, and brutal. Ethan grabbed the outstretched hand, twisted it until tendons popped, and drove his knee into the man's solar plexus. As the other 2 rushed forward, Ethan used their momentum against them, sending one face first into the fence while the other received an elbow to the throat. Guards rushed in, whistles blowing. Ethan raised his hands and assumed a compliant position. The message had been sent. 2 weeks in solitary gave Ethan more time to think. He worked out in his cell and ran scenarios through his mind. When he returned to the general population, the dynamics had shifted. No one approached him directly anymore, but he noticed a quiet respect in their eyes. That's when he met Marcus Delgado, the failed hitman. Marcus was serving time for petty crimes, but the look in his eyes when he saw Ethan told a different story. Ethan cornered him in the laundry room during work detail. "You know who I am," Ethan said. Marcus tried to back away, but Ethan positioned himself between Marcus and the door. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." "Too late," Ethan replied softly. "You were hired to kill me." Marcus swallowed hard. "I didn't go through with it, but you know who hired you." It wasn't a question. "They'll kill me if I talk." Ethan smiled, and Marcus took another step back. "They're out there. I'm in here with you. Think about that." Over the next few weeks, Ethan became Marcus's shadow. When other inmates hassled Marcus, Ethan intervened. When Marcus needed extra food from the commissary, Ethan provided it. Protection came with a price. Information. Marcus finally admitted during yard time. "Your wife, Elena, contacted me through a mutual acquaintance. She said her husband was becoming unstable and dangerous. Needed to be dealt with before he hurt someone. She paid you half up front. Damien delivered it." Marcus continued. "They said it was insurance money or something. I got spooked. Something felt off about the whole thing. Then I got picked up for another job and ended up here." Ethan's knuckles whitened, but his voice remained steady. "Why didn't you go through with it?" Marcus replied, "I got spooked. I have records of the arrangement, phone recordings, text messages, and photos of the cash handoff. It's all hidden away." Ethan leaned closer. "I want it all. Confess, clear my name, give me everything you have, and I'll ensure your survival here. Plus, when I'm done, you'll get a cut." Marcus studied Ethan's face. "You're really going after them. They're already dead. They just don't know it yet." The confession process took time. Ethan made sure Marcus understood exactly what to say, what evidence to provide, and when to reveal it. He also ensured that other inmates knew Marcus was under his protection. During this time, Ethan established a routine. He spent hours in the prison library studying law books, financial regulations, and most importantly, the art of revenge. He took notes in a small journal, writing in a code he developed based on historical ciphers. Other inmates began to notice Ethan's presence and his controlled strength. They saw how he handled problems with calculated precision rather than brute force. Some inmates offered their services, recognizing the power of a man with nothing left to lose. Jacob Lee, a former hacker serving time for cyber fraud, approached Ethan during lunch. "Heard you might need technical expertise on the outside," Jacob said. Jacob asked, "What makes you think that?" Ethan replied, "Same way I know your wife's real estate company uses outdated security protocols, and the construction business of your friend Damien runs on a network my sister could hack." Ethan took another bite of his food. Jacob continued, "Go on. I've got people on the outside. Good people. They can access systems, plant evidence, create paper trails, or expose existing ones." Eric 10. Jacob paused. "Now you're thinking like a criminal." "No," Ethan corrected. "I'm thinking like someone who wants justice." Through Marcus and Jacob, Ethan began building his network. Each contact was carefully vetted and based on mutual benefit rather than blind trust. He learned document forging from a former art fraudster and studied combat techniques from an ex-military inmate. He absorbed everything he could about the criminal underworld. During family visitation days, Ethan received regular updates from Cassie. She talked about school and her life, but her eyes told him what he needed to know. Cassie was gathering intelligence about Alina and Damien's movements. Mom bought a new house, she mentioned during one visit with Damien. "They think I don't know about their meetings before everything happened." Ethan reached across the table and touched Cassie's hand. "You're doing good, sweetheart. Just keep your eyes open and your mouth shut. When are you getting out?" Cassie replied, "Soon. And when I do, everything changes," Ethan said. As the months passed, Ethan's transformation continued. His body hardened from regular exercise, and his mind sharpened by constant study and planning. He kept detailed records, guard rotations, inmate connections, and outside contacts. Each piece of information was a potential weapon in his arsenal. The day Marcus made his official confession, Ethan watched from his cell as a media frenzy began. Local news reported, "Failed Hitman confesses, professor framed by wife and best friend." The confession didn't immediately free Ethan. The legal system moved slowly, but it was the first crack in the foundation of Alina and Damien's carefully constructed lie. More importantly, it gave Ethan legitimacy. Other inmates who had been hesitant to align with him now saw an opportunity. "I've got a cousin who works security at major hotels," one inmate told him, "who can access surveillance footage and guest records." Another offered, "My brother runs a cleaning service. Rich people barely notice you cleaning their houses." Each offer, each connection was another piece of the puzzle. Ethan accepted them all, knowing that in prison, information was more valuable than money. He started compiling files, evidence of Alina's real estate frauds, Damien's construction kickbacks, and their entire network of deception. The hitman's confession was just the beginning. By the time Ethan finished, there would be nowhere left for them to hide. The prison psychiatrist noted in her reports that inmate Mercer showed remarkable adaptation to prison life. She observed his calm demeanor, structured routine, and apparent acceptance of his situation. What she didn't see was the fire behind his eyes and the meticulous planning in his every action. She didn't understand that Ethan Mercer hadn't adapted to prison. He had transformed it into his war room. Each day brought him closer to launching his campaign, and his quiet rage grew as his plan for revenge took shape. Ethan Mercer's release from prison came on a Tuesday morning. He signed the paperwork with steady hands, collected his few possessions, and walked through the gates without looking back. The prison had served its purpose. It had given him time, resources, and a network of people who owed him favors. He bypassed the main entrance where reporters waited and used a service exit his contacts had revealed. A nondescript sit-in waited in the parking lot, driven by one of Mike Chun's associates. Highland Crest Motel, room already booked under the name Samuel Turner, his contact instructed. The motel sat on the outskirts of town. Its faded sign and peeling paint made it nearly invisible, perfect for Ethan's needs. Marcus's outside contact had set everything up with cash payments, and no questions asked. Inside the room, he found what he had requested: a laptop, burner phones, and a manila envelope containing $5,000 in cash. His savings from a construction job, hidden from Alina's greedy hands, would fund the first phase of his plan. Ethan picked up one of the burner phones and began making calls. Each number reached someone he had connected with in prison. Each conversation was brief and encoded. "The package needs delivery. Standard rate applies." He continued, "Construction project is greenlit. Send the crew. Legal documents require processing. Timeline is 48 hours. Within hours, his network activated and forged documents began appearing in strategic locations. Anonymous tips led regulators to review specific transactions. Ethan's prison contact, a master of document forgery, had created a trail of evidence. "Alina's getting nervous," Ray reported one evening. She had hired private security for their house. Damien was drinking more, and his security team reviewed surveillance photos to pinpoint weak spots. Alina was also skimming money from client escrow accounts. Damien's construction company was cutting corners and bribing inspectors. Traces of their fraud appeared everywhere. Victor Alvarez was still involved, but kept his distance, as if sensing something was wrong. Ethan added notes to his journal. His expert had created several fake profiles on social media to expose Alina's illegal practices. Each profile had a carefully crafted backstory with years of digital history. Sarah confirmed, "The profiles are ready. We've established them as legitimate industry insiders. When they reveal information, people will listen." Meanwhile, Ethan's combat trainer prepared him for physical confrontations. During training, he learned to move unnoticed, blend into crowds, and approach targets without alerting them. "You're not training for a sport," his trainer reminded him. "You're training to protect yourself and eliminate threats." At night, Ethan coordinated with his team using burner phones and encrypted messages. Each member had specific tasks to create maximum impact. Start with the small accounts and work up to the bigger frauds. Fake profiles began posting subtle hints about irregularities in local real estate deals. Anonymous comments on industry forums raised questions about certain transactions. His team planted evidence of money laundering and loan fraud. They made it appear that Alina had grown careless in her success. Damien's construction business faced similar pressure, with building inspectors receiving anonymous tips about code violations and suppliers questioning mismatched invoices. Former employees recalled suspicious activities. "Your friend is cracking," Ray reported. "He's made 3 trips to his lawyer this week." Alina was furious with him for drawing unwanted attention. Ethan monitored their reactions through surveillance feeds. He watched them argue in their driveway and noted the strain on their faces at public events. The pressure was building exactly as he had planned. Hidden cameras captured their private moments, the accusations, and the growing fear. Damien drank more heavily while Alina worked long hours to cover their tracks. Sarah noted, "She's getting sloppy, making mistakes we don't even have to fake." Ethan's network of prison contacts spread rumors about investigations and informants. The criminal underworld began distancing itself from Alina's operations. Alina tried to contact Victor Alvarez yesterday, but he wouldn't take her call. Every piece of evidence was carefully crafted and strategically revealed. Ethan made sure nothing could be traced back to him. To the world, he was still a disgraced former professor trying to rebuild his life. Local news picked up stories about questionable real estate deals. Industry blogs buzzed with fraud rumors, and social media speculated about prominent local figures under investigation. Ethan watched it all from his motel room. His room became a command center as he coordinated his team's movements and timed each revelation for maximum impact. He had transformed from a victim into an architect of destruction using the systems that betrayed him. His network expanded beyond his initial prison contacts. Sarah introduced him to hackers who could penetrate secure systems. Ray's surveillance team provided constant updates on his target's movements. The forger produced documents that would withstand any scrutiny. Every piece was carefully prepared, tested, and verified. Ethan's motel room walls were soon covered with photos, documents, and connection maps. Ray reported, "Elena's getting sloppy. She was skimming more money and taking bigger risks. Damien was drinking more and arguing with her about exposure risks, even though he knew they were vulnerable." Ethan made another note in his journal. The tools of his vengeance were almost ready. Each team member was chosen for their skills and motivation, whether for money or personal revenge. None knew the full plan, only their part. As Ethan prepared himself physically and mentally, he received updates from Leela. His daughter had become his eyes inside their home, though he shielded her from the details. "They fight sometimes when they think I'm asleep," she reported. "Damien is scared of something, but Mom just laughs it off," she added. Ethan told her, "You're doing good, sweetheart. Just remember, you never heard any of this." Leela replied, "I know, Dad. I want them to pay for what they did to you." Ethan promised, "They will, I promise." The final piece came when Abigail Escobar, the lawyer he had researched in prison, introduced him to media contacts. Reporters hungry for corruption stories would run with solid documentation. Ethan stood in his motel room, surveying the arsenal he had assembled, not weapons of steel and gunpowder, but of information and exposure. Every tool was perfectly suited to its task. The time for preparation was almost over. Soon, he would begin dismantling the lives of those who betrayed him, piece by piece, until nothing remained of their ill-gotten gains and false respectability. Ethan Mercer, the quiet history professor, was no more. In his place stood a man who had learned the true meaning of revenge and turned his prison sentence into a masterclass in destruction. The tools were ready. The war was about to begin. Ethan Mercer sat in his motel room, surrounded by monitors displaying surveillance feeds of Elena and Damien's movements. 3 burner phones lay on the desk, each dedicated to a different aspect of his operation. The wall behind him showed photos, documents, and connection maps, a war room designed for destruction. Sarah Chun's voice crackled through a secure line. "The cyber infiltration is complete. We've mapped their entire network." Ethan ordered, "Begin phase 1. Start with the small irregularities. Make them look like careless mistakes." Within hours, subtle discrepancies appeared in Elena's real estate records. Transaction dates did not match, and property values showed unexpected variations. Ray Lynch's surveillance team reported growing tension between the targets. Damien was drinking more. Ray noted 3 bar visits today. Elena was not happy about it. Ethan watched footage of Damien stumbling from his truck. Elena's face was tight with anger as she met him at the door. "Good. Keep pushing," he muttered. What about their business contacts? They were getting nervous. 2 developers pulled out of deals this week, and anonymous tips about building code violations had people asking questions. The IT experts' work proved invaluable. Fake profiles appeared across industry forums with years of manufactured history. These personas began raising subtle questions about specific real estate transactions. Whispers spread through professional networks. Elena tried to track down the source. Sarah Chun reported that she was searching for leaks in her organization and had fired 2 employees yesterday. Ethan nodded and made notes in his journal. "Perfect. She's creating more enemies," he thought. What about the document trail? The forger had crafted a masterful set of evidence: bank transfers, property records, and loan agreements. Each document told part of the story of their fraud. Ethan's team planted these documents strategically, making them appear as poorly hidden records of illegal transactions. The building inspector received another anonymous tip. Ray confirmed that Damien's construction site was shut down for safety violations. He's losing contracts. Ethan monitored their reactions through hidden cameras. Elena paced in their expensive kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising with frustration. Damien sat in his home office, bottle in hand, staring at financial reports that showed their empire crumbling. Victor Alvarez was getting skittish, Sarah Chun noted. His associates were distancing themselves. The breadcrumbs planted about money laundering had them spooked. The pressure mounted steadily. Ethan's combat training served him well as he moved through their social circles in various disguises. At charity events and business functions, he watched them from behind false identities, noting their growing paranoia. Ray Lynch reported, "Alina is making mistakes. Real ones now, not just our planted ones. She transferred money between accounts without proper documentation, leaving a trail even amateur investigators could follow." Ethan's network expanded beyond his initial prison contacts. Former inmates who owed him favors spread rumors in criminal circles. Legitimate businesses began quietly backing away from deals with Alina and Damien. Local news stations started asking questions, and industry blog posts about fraudulent deals gained traction. Social media buzzed with the story. Every piece of evidence was carefully timed and strategically placed. Nothing led back to Ethan. To the world, he remained a disgraced professor keeping his head down, while his targets' lives unraveled thread by thread. Hidden cameras captured their private moments. The accusations, the blame, and the fear. Damien drank heavily, missing crucial meetings. Alina worked long hours trying to plug leaks in their sinking ship. Alina tried reaching Victor Alvarez 3 times today, but Ray noted he was not taking her calls anymore. His people said he was reviewing their business relationship. Ethan coordinated everything from his motel command center. Each team member knew only their part, never the full scope of his plan. He had transformed from victim to puppet master, pulling strings that made his enemies dance. The financial pressure intensified. Alina began shifting money between accounts desperately, while Damien's construction company faced mounting regulatory scrutiny. Their perfect life showed widening cracks. They were fighting more, Ray reported, as home security feeds captured every argument. Damien wanted to cut losses and run, but Alina refused to let go. Their expensive house became a prison of paranoia. Their stolen wealth turned toxic. Each day brought new pressures, revelations, and cracks in their facade. Ethan's revenge was not just about punishment. It was about making them feel his own helplessness, betrayal, and the slow, crushing weight of destruction. As Phase 1 neared completion, Ethan reviewed his journal. Each step had been executed perfectly. His transformation from wronged husband to architect of destruction was almost complete. Ray reported late one night, "Alina is making calls to offshore accounts, and Damien is meeting with criminal defense lawyers. They know something's coming. They just don't know what." Ethan closed his journal with a cold smile. The setup was complete. His targets were isolated, afraid and making fatal mistakes. Phase 2 could begin. The tools were in place, the pressure points identified, and the weaknesses exposed. Now it was time to destroy them completely. Ethan Mercer stood in his motel room command center, watching multiple surveillance feeds of Alina and Damien's crumbling world. Their once perfect life lay in ruins, though they had not yet realized the full extent of their destruction. Another investor pulled out this morning, Ray Lynch reported through the secure line. Alina spent 2 hours trying to damage control. No luck. Ethan observed his ex-wife on the monitor, her composure slipping as she made frantic phone calls. Her designer clothes could not hide the tension in her shoulders or the desperate edge in her gestures. Damien was not handling it well. Ray Lynch continued, noting that he had 3 meetings with criminal defense lawyers this week and was starting to crack. Ethan commanded, "Show me their home feeds." The screen shifted to their house, the one they had bought with his stolen life. Through hidden cameras, he watched their marriage dissolve in real time. "You said you had this under control," Damien shouted, holding a whiskey glass. "Now we're losing everything." Alina spun on him. "My deals. Your sloppy construction deals are drawing attention. I told you to be careful with the permits." Damien retorted, "What about your creative accounting? The regulators are asking questions about missing escrow funds." Ethan made notes in his journal as he watched them tear into each other. Sarah Chun's voice came through a secure line. "The digital breadcrumbs are working. 3 news outlets are now investigating Alina's real estate practices. They are following the trail exactly as planned." Ray Lynch added. And Victor Alvarez is running scared. Our leaks about his loan sharking operation have his criminal associates nervous. He is trying to distance himself from Elena and Damien. Ethan nodded with satisfaction. Abigail, are you ready with the legal documentation? His new lawyer replied crisply. Everything's prepared. The hitman's confession is authenticated, the financial records are organized, and injunctions against their assets are in place. We can move when you give the word. Through the cameras, they watched Elena and Damien's desperate attempts to save themselves. They held dinner parties to maintain appearances, yet their social circle was shrinking as former friends stopped accepting invitations and business associates found excuses not to meet. Ray Lynch reported, your daughter Lila called. She says Damien is drinking more and getting angry. Should we be concerned? Increased surveillance on the house was ordered. If he became a threat to Lila, we would move immediately. But Lila proved more than capable of handling herself. Through the cameras, Ethan watched Lila navigate her home life, playing her role perfectly while gathering intelligence. Elena had been shredding documents, according to secure calls, and Damien even caught her burning papers in the backyard at midnight. The pressure continued mounting. Anonymous tips led health inspectors to Damien's construction sites, and building permits were suddenly under review. Elena's real estate listings attracted scrutiny from regulatory boards. They were fighting about money. Ray Lynch reported, Damien wanted to liquidate assets and run to Mexico, but Elena refused. She said she wouldn't live like a fugitive. Later, Ethan watched their late-night argument through the surveillance feed. We could disappear, Damien pleaded. I have contacts. We built this life. Elena snarled. I'm not running away like some criminal. We are criminals. Damien shouted. Everything's falling apart, and you're still in denial. Ethan's network of informants reported every move. Damien was seen at CD bars meeting with questionable characters, and Elena attempted to bribe officials to silence whistleblowers. Each desperate act only dug them deeper. Ethan reviewed the evidence his team had gathered. Bank records showing fraudulent transfers, documents proving the forged loan agreement, and recordings of Elena arranging a hit on his life. Everything was in place to destroy them completely. Ray Lynch reported, Elena tried reaching out to Victor Alvarez again, but his people shut her down hard. They said he'd go to the authorities if she contacted him. Through the surveillance feeds, Ethan observed their isolation growing. Their phones rang less frequently, social invitations went unanswered, and former friends crossed the street to avoid them. Damien was growing paranoid, Ray Lynch noted, having installed new security systems and hired private guards. He knew something was coming, he just did not know what. Ethan watched them retreat into their expensive house, a stolen paradise turning into a prison. Elena's perfect appearance showed cracks. Even her makeup could not hide the strain in her eyes. Damien's drinking increased, his temper shortened, and his movements became more erratic. All the pieces were in place. Abigail confirmed that the evidence was solid, and the witnesses were ready. Ethan reviewed his journal one final time, checking each phase of his plan. The trap was set perfectly. His enemies had nowhere to run, and no one left to trust, not even each other. Ethan ordered, leak the first batch of evidence to the media. Let's show them what real betrayal feels like. The destruction of Elena and Damien's world began with a series of strikes. Ethan coordinated from his command center, orchestrating their downfall with cold efficiency. Released the financial records. He ordered Sarah Chun. Start with the fraudulent property deals. Within hours, 3 major news outlets ran stories about suspicious real estate transactions. Anonymous sources provided documentation of systematic fraud, money laundering, and investor deception. Ethan watched Elena's reaction through the surveillance feeds. She sat in her home office, her face pale as she read the news reports. Her phone buzzed constantly as clients canceled contracts, partners distanced themselves, and regulators demanded answers. Damien was not taking it well, Ray Lynch reported. He tried contacting Victor Alvarez again, but was shut down hard. Surveillance footage showed Damien's meltdown as he swept papers off his desk before slumping with a bottle of whiskey. "Your cybersecurity contact is ready," Sarah Chun announced. "We can access all of Elena's business servers whenever you give the word." Ethan said, "Do it. Take everything." The digital assault was comprehensive. Company emails exposed systematic fraud. Financial records revealed missing client funds, and internal documents proved deliberate code violations in Damien's construction projects. The media was running with it. Abigail reported. 3 more outlets picked up the story, calling it the biggest real estate scandal in the city's history. Ethan watched his targets unravel through multiple camera feeds. Elena paced her office, making desperate phone calls to damage control. Damien drank heavily as his construction empire crumbled around him. "Time to release the hitman's confession," Ethan ordered. The recording hit the news like a bomb. The hitman's detailed account of Elena hiring him to kill Ethan, backed by phone recordings and financial transfers, sent shockwaves through the community. Police reopened the investigation into the case, Abigail announced. They reviewed the loan fraud, embezzlement, and murder attempt. Ethan observed as police cars pulled up to Elena's office and escorted her out in handcuffs. Her perfect mascara was streaked with tears. Damien tried to run. Ray Lynch reported urgently. He was at the airport trying to book a flight to Mexico. Ethan said coldly, "No, you don't get to escape." One call to federal authorities ensured Damien never made it past security. Ethan watched through airport cameras as agents surrounded Damien and took him into custody. Victor Alvarez was also arrested, Sarah Chun reported. FBI agents raided his offices this morning, seizing loan sharking records, money laundering evidence, and connections to organized crime. Media coverage was relentless. News vans parked outside Elena and Damien's homes. Former friends and associates gave interviews, distancing themselves as their carefully constructed social facades crumbled. Ray Lynch confirmed, "Your daughter's safe." Leela was staying with her aunt until this blew over. Ethan watched police raids as officers boxed up documents from Elena's office and federal agents seized computers from Damien's company. Their empire of lies collapsed piece by piece. In county jail, Damien broke first. Ethan observed through security cameras as his former friend confessed everything to investigators about the fraud, conspiracy, and murder plot. Damien tried to make a deal, with Abigail reporting that he offered to testify against Elena in exchange for leniency. "No deals," Ethan ordered. "Make sure the prosecutors have everything. I want them buried." The preliminary hearing was a media circus. Ethan watched from the back of the courtroom as Elena and Damien were led in wearing prison jumpsuits. Their eyes met his briefly. Damien mouthed, "Please, I'm sorry." Ethan turned away, his face hard. Sorry means nothing, he thought. Forgiveness was no longer in his vocabulary. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, witness testimony, digital forensics, and a mountain of proof. The hitman's testimony about the murder plot sealed their fate. Prosecutors offered 30 years with no possibility of early release, Abigail reported. Ethan nodded with satisfaction as he watched his enemies crumble. Their expensive lawyers could not save them. Their social connections abandoned them. They faced their fate alone, just as they had left him. Ethan ordered his team, "Release everything to the media. Show the world who they really are." The complete story hit the news. The betrayal, the frame-up, and the murder plot. Ethan's name was cleared completely as public opinion swung, condemning Elena and Damien while hailing him as a victim of terrible injustice. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Holloway prepared to deliver the sentence. Ethan Mercer sat in the gallery, watching his former wife and best friend stand before the bench in Prison Orange. The crimes committed by the defendants show a level of calculated cruelty that this court rarely sees, the judge declared. The systematic fraud, false imprisonment, and attempted murder plot demonstrate a complete disregard for human dignity. Ethan observed Elena's perfect posture finally breaking as the judge continued. Damien swayed slightly, his face ashen. Therefore, this court sentences each defendant to 35 years in federal prison. All assets gained through criminal activity will be seized and restituted to their victims. The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom. Ethan watched expressionlessly as guards led Elena and Damien away. Their eyes saw his one final time. Elena's filled with desperate plea, Damien's with broken resignation. Ethan turned away. Their fate was sealed, their destruction complete. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded him. "Mr. Mercer, how does it feel to be exonerated? The truth always comes out." Ethan replied simply, "Justice has been served." Later, Abigail met him in her office to handle the paperwork. "The restitution orders are being processed. You will receive full compensation for all financial damages." "The money doesn't matter," Ethan said. "Making them pay was what mattered. Their reputations are destroyed, their assets seized, their freedom gone." His lawyers studied him carefully. "Was it worth it?" Ethan's face remained impassive. "They tried to destroy me, take my life, my freedom, my daughter. There's no forgiveness for that." Later, he met Leela at a small cafe away from the media. Leela had grown stronger through the ordeal, her innocence replaced by hard-won wisdom. "What happens now, Dad?" she asked. "We start over, somewhere new, away from all this," Ethan replied. Leela nodded. "Mom tried to call me from jail. I didn't answer." "Good. She made her choice. She must live with it," Ethan said. He had arranged a fresh start, a house in a new city and new opportunities. The betrayal had changed him, transforming him from a trusting teacher into someone harder, someone who understood the true face of human nature. His network of contacts gradually dispersed. Each received their promised payment, and their connections were severed cleanly. One last thing, Ray Lynch reported during their final meeting. "Damien tried to send you a letter from prison. Want me to get rid of it?" Ray asked. "Burn it," Ethan ordered. "The past is dead." He sold the house he once shared with Elena, erasing all traces of his old life. The gentle professor who trusted too easily was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more ruthless, and more aware of humanity's capacity for betrayal. Local media hailed him as a victim triumphant. But Ethan knew the truth was darker and more complex. He had become what circumstances demanded, a man capable of destroying his enemies without mercy. He burned his revenge journal page by page. Its purpose was fulfilled, and its detailed plans executed perfectly. What remained was a new future, unmarked by past shadows. As Ethan and Leela prepared to leave town, he took one last look at the city. The betrayal had broken the man he was, but from those shattered pieces emerged someone stronger, someone who would never be vulnerable again. "Ready?" Leela asked. Ethan nodded, turning away from the past. He had won, not just survived, but triumphed. His enemies were destroyed, his name cleared, and his daughter safe by his side. The cost was his old self, his capacity for trust, his belief in human goodness. A fair trade, he decided, for the power to protect what mattered and punish those who deserved it. The old Ethan Mercer was truly gone. In his place stood someone forged in betrayal's fire, tempered by revenge. He had become the master of his own fate, and he would never be betrayed again. Epilogue. 10 years later. Ethan Mercer stood at the window of his corner office in Boston, watching the city bustle below. At 52, his hair had touches of gray at the temples, but his physique remained strong, maintained by the disciplined routine he developed in prison. The prestigious Williams College History Department had been eager to hire him 5 years ago. His published works on historical revenge societies earned him a reputation as a leading expert in the field. On his desk sat a newspaper clipping from his old hometown. Elena Lang, now simply Elena Lang, had been denied parole for the 3rd time. The board cited her continued lack of remorse. 25 years remained on her sentence. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Leela. "Dad, remember Jennifer's graduation is next weekend. Sarah says you better not miss your granddaughter's walk." A small smile crossed his face. "Leela, now 26, had built a successful life in Seattle. Her cybersecurity firm, partly built with skills learned from Sarah Chun, specialized in protecting small businesses from fraud. She married a software developer named Michael Ross, and their daughter Jennifer became the light of Ethan's life. The lessons of betrayal had not been lost on Leela. She had grown into a formidable woman, careful with trust and fiercely protective of those who earned it. She never spoke of Elena nor visited her in prison. To Leela, her mother had died the day Ethan was arrested. Ethan's desk phone buzzed again. "Dr. Mercer, Ray Lynch is here to see you. Send him in." Ray had aged well, and his private investigation business thrived after Ethan's case made him a reputation. Ray still did occasional work for Ethan, keeping tabs on various players from their shared past. "Damien died last night," Ray announced without preamble. "A prison heart attack." He had been declining for months. Ethan absorbed the news without visible reaction. Damien had received 35 years but served only 10. Death had granted him early release. "Any last messages?" Ray asked. "Same as always," Ethan replied. Damien had begged for forgiveness, but his letters were never read. Damien had written many letters filled with apologies and explanations, yet each was returned unopened or burned unread. Ethan's capacity for forgiveness had died in that prison cell a decade ago. What about Victor Alvarez? He remained in witness protection. After his criminal network collapsed, he lived in Arizona under a new name, working as a car salesman. He had traded information for a reduced sentence, and his empire was dismantled. And our old team. Ray settled into a chair and pulled out his tablet. Sarah Chun was running her own cybersecurity consulting firm in Singapore, very successful and very legitimate. She still sent Christmas cards. Ethan glanced at the digital photo frame on his desk. Sarah had attended Layla's wedding 3 years ago, one of the few connections from that time he maintained. Mike Chin got out last year. His sister set him up with a job at her company, and he now audits computer systems for banks. The forger, Marcus Rodriguez, had gone legitimate too. He now did art restoration in Chicago and had a gallery showing next month. The network Ethan built for his revenge had scattered globally, with most transitioning to legal enterprises. He kept loose tabs on them through Ray, ensuring none would ever become a threat. "Abigail's firm is handling Jennifer's trust fund paperwork," Ethan noted. Abigail Escobar had parlayed her role in exposing corruption into a stellar legal career. She specialized in defending wrongly accused clients, using many techniques developed during Ethan's revenge. Patty Lopes retired last year, and Ray added that she still felt guilty for not seeing through Elena's scheme. Ethan recalled his first lawyer, who sent him a long letter after the truth emerged, apologizing for failing to prevent his conviction. He responded briefly and never hired her services again. The door opened, and Ethan's teaching assistant entered with a stack of papers. "Dr. Mercer, your lectures for next semester's course on historical justice systems need review." "Thank you, David," he replied calmly. The top page read, "Revenge is Restoration. Historical Perspectives on Personal Justice." After Ray left, Ethan reviewed his upcoming lectures. His academic focus on historical revenge had earned him international recognition. Universities regularly invited him to speak about justice systems throughout history, never suspecting they hosted a man who had orchestrated one of the most complete acts of personal revenge in recent memory. His phone buzzed again with a text from Leela. "Dad, Jennifer's asking about her middle name again. Should I tell her the story?" Ethan paused. Jennifer's middle name was Rachel, after Ray's sister who died during the revenge operation. The accident was random and unrelated to their plans, but it had cemented Ray's commitment to destroying those who prey on others. The name reminded Ethan that revenge, however justified, carried unexpected costs. Later that evening, Ethan drove to his home in the Berkshires, a modernist structure of glass and steel that bore no resemblance to his old life. His housekeeper, Maria, had left dinner in the warmer. She worked for him 3 days a week, vetted by Ray's agency. As he ate, Ethan reviewed the latest intelligence report from Ray's firm. Alina's prison communications remained monitored, though she had largely given up contact with the outside world. Her last visitor was 3 years ago, a true crime writer researching the case. Ethan had ensured the author received all the documented evidence to portray events accurately. His home office contained a hidden safe with copies of all the evidence that destroyed Alina and Damien. Digital backups existed in secure locations. He had learned never to discard leverage, no matter how complete the victory seemed. The next morning, he taught his graduate seminar on historical power structures, where eager students debated personal justice in corrupt societies. Ethan guided the discussion dispassionately, never revealing his intimate knowledge of the subject. During lunch, he spoke with Jennifer via video chat. His granddaughter, barely 5, showed him her latest family portrait. The portrait included only her parents, herself, and Grandpa Ethan. She knew nothing of her other grandmother, and Ethan intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. "When are you coming to visit?" Jennifer asked. "Next weekend for your graduation," Ethan reminded her. "I've got your present already picked out." After the call, Ethan received an encrypted email from Sarah Chun. Her regular security suites flagged concerning chatter, former associates of Victor Alvarez, asking questions about Ethan's past. Although Victor remained cowed, others occasionally probed for weaknesses. Ethan forwarded the info to Ray with one instruction: handle it. He had learned to take no chances with potential threats. The network he built for revenge now served to protect his rebuild life. Any hint of danger was eliminated quietly, efficiently, and completely. That evening, Ethan attended a faculty dinner where colleagues debated a recent case of corporate whistleblowing. They discussed the ethics of exposure versus loyalty. Ethan offered historical perspectives while keeping personal insights hidden. One professor argued, "Revenge serves no constructive purpose in a civilized society." Ethan sipped his wine and thought of Elena in her prison cell, of Damien's fatal heart attack, and of Victor Alvarez living in fear under an assumed name. "Revenge," he replied carefully, "is neither constructive nor destructive. It simply is, like gravity. It exists whether we approve or not. The real question is how it shapes both the avenger and the target." Later that night, Ethan received his weekly report from the prison system. Elena had attempted to send another letter addressed to Jennifer, but it vanished before reaching its destination. Ethan's phone lit up with a text from Leela. "Got the quarterly trust fund statement. Pretty aggressive investment strategy, Dad." He smiled slightly. The trust fund for Jennifer, now worth several $1,000,000, was built partly from Elena and Damien's seized assets. A fitting use for their ill-gotten gains, Ethan thought. The next morning, he met with his department chair to discuss his upcoming book, Justice Outside the Law: Historical Perspectives on Personal Vengeance. The publisher had ordered a substantial first printing. "Your personal experience with wrongful conviction adds such authenticity to your work," the chair commented. Ethan nodded, acknowledging the statement without revealing how deep that authenticity ran. His academic career had become the perfect cover. No one would suspect a respected historian of orchestrating one of the most complete acts of personal revenge in recent memory. That afternoon, he received an update from Abigail about minor legal matters. She had become one of the few people from that time he still trusted. "The last appeal is denied. Elena's conviction stands with no possibility of review," she reported. Ethan thanked her and then prepared for his trip to Seattle. Jennifer's preschool graduation was a minor event, but he valued these moments of normal family life. His revenge had cost him his old self and his capacity for easy trust, but it had given him cold clarity and the power to protect what mattered. As he packed for Seattle, Ethan reflected on the decade since his revenge was complete. He had rebuilt his life on his own terms, succeeding in ways his old self never imagined. His academic career provided both cover and satisfaction. His relationship with Leela had grown stronger through shared lessons of betrayal. Jennifer represented a future unmarred by past shadows. The betrayal transformed him from a trusting academic into someone harder and colder. That transformation had exacted a price, but it granted him power he never dreamed of. His network, though largely dormant, remained ready to activate against any threat to his new life. Ethan Mercer was now a living example of fulfilled historical revenge. His enemies were destroyed or dead. His name was cleared and respected. His family was protected. The cost was his old self, but he considered it a fair exchange for the power to ensure betrayal would never harm him or his loved ones again. The man who emerged from that crucible of betrayal and vengeance stood stronger, more resolute, and certain of his path forward. He had become the master of his own fate, and he intended to keep it that way. As night fell over the Berkshires, Ethan stood at his window, gazing at the city lights below. Somewhere in a federal prison, Alina Lang sat in her cell, her dreams reduced to concrete walls and steel bars. Damien's body lay in the prison morgue, his betrayal ending not with redemption but with lonely death. Victor Alvarez lived his borrowed life in Arizona, always jumping at shadows. Ethan's phone buzzed one final time. Lila sent a photo of Jennifer trying on her graduation outfit. The image brought a rare, genuine smile to his face. This was what he had fought for, protecting a new generation from betrayal's poison. The gentle professor had died in that prison cell a decade ago. The man who emerged, harder and unforgiving, had built something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. He had become someone who could not be betrayed, broken, or defeated. And he would keep it that way, no matter the cost. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.